Hey guys, I'm Danielle. Really sorry that I can't be there with you, but I'm really glad that I can continue this for you guys because I know how important it is and I really value it. Anyways, I just want to introduce myself to those of you who are new. I'm Danielle Mine and originally from Maryland, but I'm now in California, which is why you're watching me on a video instead of me coming and being with you guys. So I'm a registered dietitian. I did my clinical internship at University of Maryland Medical Center right downtown, and I'm now working at a hospital in Los Angeles, California. So I just want to share with you guys some basics in nutrition that you can apply to your daily life and uh, bring your health back. Okay, so today we're talking just about nutrition basics, so just fundamentals so that the rest of the information makes more sense. You're gonna get some information today though that you can definitely use and apply, and some that's actually really surprising. All right, so first we're going to start with why does nutrition actually matter? Why is it so important and how does it make a difference? So number one, it's providing fuel for your body to meet the demands that you make on your body. I mean, just think about it. Do you want to feel great? Do you want to look great? You have to actually provide that nutrition that's required to feel and look great. You also want to think about what quality of life do you want to live? Picture that, think about it, give it some thought in 20 years, in 10 years, right now. How do you want to be feeling every single day? What do you want to be doing with your life? That's going to be like a big goal of yours. And the things I'm going to tell you are going to help you get there. Lastly, keep in mind, just because some people may look good on the outside, it doesn't mean that they do on the inside. So I know actually some people that are like a size 2 and they look great, but I've seen what they eat and it's not going to be able to last that long. Okay, so nutrition really does matter for several reasons. But first, I just want to talk about how God gave us this responsibility and gift of our bodies. So our bodies are actually a responsibility and a gift from God, from my perspective. So 1 Corinthians 6:19 says, "Don't you realize that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit who lives in you and was given to you by God? You do not belong to yourself." So we're supposed to be good stewards of our body, just like we're supposed to be good stewards of our money. We shouldn't spend it frivolously and however we want. We have a budget, we have bills that need to be paid. We have to plan for that and make sure the money is there so that those bills can get paid and those things can be bought. So we should think kind of in a similar way regarding food and our bodies and our health. We have to be responsible in that sense. We can't just do whatever we want and think there's not going to be any consequences. Eventually, our budget will run out. But this isn't just a responsibility, it's also a gift. So we should treat it as such. I mean, when we get expensive gifts from our loved ones, we take care of them and we show that we value them. Otherwise, it's like disrespectful and really rude, right? So it shouldn't in the same way we value our body. We all need to realize that we're worth it. Our health is worth it. Taking care of ourselves is really worth it. On a serious note, I just encourage you guys to really just ask God seriously what he thinks of you. What does he say about you? And ask him, am I worth it? And you know what? He's going to answer. And the answer will be really good and very motivating. God has a plan for each of us, and we want to make sure we're around to carry out that plan and see what it has for us. I mean, we can't really do much of what he has planned if we're sick in bed, if we're dealing with chronic diseases at the age of 50, like most of America. So this I want to encourage you guys to have be your true motivation. I mean, some people have motivators like Just simple things like a 5-pound weight loss, a 20-pound weight loss, or I want to look good in my dress. But a real long-lasting motivator is I'm worth it. My health is worth it for my family, for me, for whatever, you know. God knows I'm worth it. God says I'm worth it. So that's a long-lasting motivator. All right, now down to the nitty-gritty. We're going to talk about 3 things today, the 3 basic food groups: carbohydrates, fat, and protein. 3 types of food, no more. Okay, so carbohydrates. All carbohydrates have one thing in common: glucose, no matter what the type of carbohydrate. So this glucose is used as a source of energy, which is basically fuel for our bodies. That's the point of glucose. That's the point of carbohydrates. So think of some carbohydrates on the tops of your heads. Go around and shout some out. So there's actually 2 types of carbohydrates: simple and complex. Simple carbs have have a couple sugar molecules linked together. And then complex carbohydrates have several. So simple carbohydrates are usually processed foods, refined foods, so those are, you think of like bad foods. But then there's also, you know, good foods, natural foods that are in this category. Fruit, dairy, all types, whether it's 2%, 1%, fat-free or whole, any of it, it's all simple carbs. And then let's see, and candy. I mean, you guys can continue naming some. Okay, and then there's complex carbs, and those include more starchy foods. So beans, starchy vegetables. Can you guys think of any starchy vegetables? Okay, so starchy vegetables like peas. I bet one of you is going to say corn, and it's not a starchy vegetable. It's actually a grain. Yeah, it's not part of your vegetables on your plate. So if you're just having like corn, rice, and a meat, you can't say you have a vegetable on the plate. Okay, so first thing you guys have learned today, right? All right, so other grains are part of the complex carbs, like bread, cereal. It doesn't matter if it's whole grain bread, white bread, it's all complex carbs. The whole point of it is to break down into glucose and use it as fuel in your body. So the difference between complex and simple: complex has more chains of glucose. It has longer lasting energy. Simple carbs, a couple glucose molecules. It's short acting, quick acting energy. Comes and goes real fast. Okay, so the problem with carbohydrates is that too many will turn into fat. So too many carbs equals fat storage in our bodies. The other problem is that when we're eating carbs, it literally tells our fat stores in our bodies to close the doors, don't get used up for energy. So meaning, don't burn any fat while I'm eating carbs right now, or digesting my carbs or metabolizing them. Because there's a hormone called insulin that gets released when we eat carbs. It literally goes and closes the doors of the cells and says, stay in there right now, you cannot come out. So that means when we're trying to lose weight, when we're trying to lose fat, you have to think about your carbohydrate intake. All right, let's move on to the second food group, and that is protein. Protein's more simple. There's not different types. There's one type of proteins. And let's talk about the role that protein has in our body. So it does a few things. It builds, maintains, and repletes muscle and other tissues. So your organs, everything, the little things in your blood, your red blood cells, it is a part of all of those things in your body. So it has other roles. It's part of enzymes and antibodies in your body. It gets used for lots of little things like that, and then the big things like muscles. All right, so we get protein from mainly meat, chicken, eggs, fish, and even dairy. So cheese and milk, we even get it from that. And then we get some protein from vegetables, beans, soy, grains, and nuts. We get some. It's not the same as the protein we get from meat and eggs and fish and dairy. So same as with carbohydrates, if we eat too much protein, it will get stored as fat. It's also used as an energy source when we're starving. Not so much if you skip a meal, it won't be used. But if you're going days without food, it will start breaking down. You know how, have you noticed if you have a family member in the hospital for a few weeks or even just a week, they start looking a little skinnier, so their muscle starts breaking down because the body's using the protein for energy. The other thing that can lead to it breaking down is being inactive, so not exercising as much, not using those muscles on a daily basis. That breaks down. Okay, so last food group we're going to talk about is fat, and this is a very important one because look at all the roles it has in our bodies. It has a lot of jobs to do. It's responsible for many things that the other two food groups cannot do. All right, so first it's an energy source, just like the other two food groups. It's broken down and used as fuel in the body. But it also does some other really important things. It carries vitamins, some specific vitamins, to the place that they belong. It helps them get absorbed, and then it helps get them to the right cells. Vitamin A, E, D, and K. So you hear a lot about, like on Dr. Oz and just regular TV about vitamin D being so important. So fat is required for vitamin D to get absorbed and then used. If you just take, for instance, a vitamin D supplement and you don't have enough fat in your body, or in your diet, then it'll be difficult for it to be absorbed and used. So next, fat is part of every single cell in your body. So think of a cell as a circle, right? And around that circle, there's going to be a wall built up. It keeps the good things inside and the bad things on the outside, right? So if there's not enough fat, it'll start looking like not so much of a circle, but kind of a misshapen blob, right? Because that wall on the outside that's made up of fat is not going to be super strong and rigid anymore. So that's what fat has to do with the cells in our body. They make up that cell wall. Next, they protect every organ in our body. Every organ in our body is surrounded by some fat insulation. Just think of like the insulation in your walls in your house. It's just like that. It's required. It's necessary. It also helps send messages between cells in our body. So neurons are the cells in our body that send those messages from nerve cell to nerve cell. Keeps your hands moving. I mean, it does everything. It sends messages in our brain so that I think, move my hand and it moves, right? Okay, so covering those nerve cells like a tube is a nice thick cover of fat. And if that fat covering is compromised, if it's weak, then the message has a hard time getting across. Next, fat is used to help make hormones, and I know a lot of people struggle with hormone imbalances, and that can be due to a low-fat diet or a diet not high enough in the right fats. So in order to make hormones like estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, any hormone, fat is needed. It's part of our skin. Fat's also part of our skin. It helps keep our skin moist. And lastly, it's stored for later use. So if we do skip a meal, we can always use our fat stores. I know we all have plenty of them to use for energy when we skip that meal. All right, now one thing to keep in mind, if you haven't noticed, every food group, carbs, protein, and fat, if we eat too much of any of them, they get stored as fat in our bodies. So it's not just, well, I can eat as much fat as I want, but it won't make me fat. No, it will. I can eat as much protein as I want, but it won't make me fat. No, it will. So they all do that. The one that causes the most problems with burning fat so that we get Smaller is carbs. So go back to that slide if you need to. Remember, carbs cause the fat stores to stay there. You cannot open that door to burn that fat if you're eating too many carbs. Okay, so back to fat for a little bit. We have two types, unsaturated fat and saturated. Okay, so let me explain unsaturated fat. Do you see those two little guys on the bottom of your screen there? You have one with some crooked legs and one with some very straight, strong legs. Okay, so the crooked legs, those molecules are unsaturated fat. So they look a little bit weaker, right? They're not as steady on their feet. So it's unsaturated fat. So those are your oils, like vegetable oil, margarine, any butter that you can spread really easily, that's margarine, and it's made of vegetable oil. So these unsaturated fats, the ones I just named, those are more processed and refined. But then there's some exceptions. There's fatty fish, there's nuts, there's avocado, and there's a little bit in some meat. So I don't want you to think all unsaturated fats are bad and processed. It's just those ones that are coming from an unnatural source. Vegetable oil, margarine, and the spreadable butter, any type of oils, those are unsaturated fats. So those are actually, see how they're weak. They look a little unsteady on their legs, right? So that means they're actually really easily damaged by heat, air, and light. So think about then cooking with those oils. Which of those three elements are they being exposed to when you're cooking? Are they being exposed to heat? Yeah. Light? Yeah, it's out in the open. You're not cooking in the dark. Air? Yeah, you're not cooking in a vacuum. So they're being exposed to all three of those elements. Therefore, they get damaged really easily. Not only that, but think about the processing they have to go through in the manufacturing plant. So vegetable oils, where does that come from exactly? Because where it comes from really is important to how it affects our bodies. We want to know the source of our food because that helps dictate what it does in our bodies. It tells us how nutritious it is. It tells us how healthy it is. So for vegetable oils, first of all, I don't see much oil in my vegetables when I eat them, right? I mean, I can't squeeze some lettuce or squash or carrots and get any oil out of it. So what's vegetable oil? Something that you can only get out of vegetables if you add a chemical solvent. So it's just a really harsh chemical that they wash the vegetables that they're using and extract chemically the oil. So additionally, then they use a lot of heat, pressure, and more chemical baths to purify that oil and get the most out that they can. They also do this to things like soybean oil, canola oil, corn oil, peanut oil, any oil you can think of basically, except some of the olive oils that are cold pressed. So all of these oils, they're going to use a lot of heat and pressure and chemical solvents to get that oil, to get as much of it as they can, purify it, and so it's exposed to all of that even before it gets to the pan on your stove in your kitchen. And then you're going to expose it to more heat and air and light, right? So what's the consequence of that in our bodies? It actually causes inflammation. So those unsaturated oils and the margarine, it actually causes inflammation in our bodies. And inflammation leads to almost every chronic illness. So it can contribute to obesity, diabetes, kidney disease, arthritis, allergies. It can contribute to so many things. So inflammation is really Okay, so as I said, the biggest contributor to chronic illness in most Americans is inflammation, which leads to heart disease. That's one of the biggest, but also diabetes and kidney disease, arthritis, so many other problems that you either have or you know someone that has it. I definitely do, and so many of my patients have at least one of those things I just named. So if we can get to the root cause, which is inflammation, if you can avoid that or reverse that, that will help with all those bigger problems. And so like we talked about, those big contributors to inflammation are those damaged, refined, unsaturated fatty oils. So those vegetable oils, margarine, just to recap. And I just want to clarify that you see that exception at the bottom where it says fatty fish, nuts, avocado, and some unsaturated fats in meat. Those are obviously whole food sources. It comes in the whole food. It's not extracted and separated and refined. So these are good sources of unsaturated fats. Okay, so moving on to saturated fats. All right, so you see that that little guy with the strong legs that are really stable, right? So you think that he's pretty solid. So that's saturated. So that would be butter, eggs, and any meat, basically, mostly has saturated fat, a little bit of the unsaturated. So these foods are actually obviously natural. They didn't come from a factory. They weren't manufactured and refined and processed. They're just naturally found. I mean, we get butter and eggs and meat from animals, right? It's just natural. So these, because they're solid and strong, they're not easily damaged. So they're not inflammatory. They're anti-inflammatory. So not only do they prevent inflammation, but they help reverse it. I know this is probably really surprising. This is not something we hear all the time. We usually hear that the main cause of heart disease and other chronic illnesses are because we eat too much fat in our diet. Butter's bad, eggs and meat, they're all bad. They're fattening, so it will cause heart disease. So won't you be happy to hear that this isn't true? There's actually lots and lots of studies to say that this is not true, but doctors are really slow to agree to that for some reason. Many of which I could go into, but that'll take forever, so let's not. But think back to, I don't know, how your grandmothers grew up. Before the 30s, before the 40s, back in those days, people didn't have vegetable oil, right? They didn't have corn oil. What did they cook with? They cooked with butter and lard. They ate a lot of eggs. I mean, everyone had chickens, right? So that they didn't know what those oils were. They didn't have margarine and like country crock. They didn't have that. And guess what? No one ever had a heart attack. That didn't exist. People didn't have those problems. People didn't have kidney disease or diabetes. But they definitely didn't have heart attacks. So we'll talk a little bit more about that right after this last slide. But we'll come right back to that. So basically, saturated fats are anti-inflammatory. Now, the last note I want to say about that is there is a difference between grass-fed and grain-fed animals. So grass-fed animals will produce a higher quality saturated fat versus grain-fed. Grass-fed is a more natural diet. That's how animals were meant to eat. Grain-fed just makes the industry more money because the animals get fatter quicker, right? So they produce a more inflammatory product. They produce more inflammatory meat, basically. So I'm just letting you know that so that you're aware. So that if you see meat or cheese, for instance, that says grass-fed, I want you to know that there's actually more valuable. It's higher quality, so the reason it costs more is because basically every bite you're getting more nutrition. So something to keep in mind if that's an option for some of you. Okay, so last slide, fat busting myths. We actually need a lot more fat than we think. Think about that whole list of the jobs that fat has in our bodies. It was a long list, right? Much longer than carbs and protein. Carbs has one job, to provide fuel. Protein has a couple jobs. Provide fuel when we're starving, keep our muscles there, and make all those little things in our bodies, the antibodies, the enzymes, right? But fat has a really long list. So we need a lot more than most doctors and media tells us we need, right? So all this stuff that you see in marketing and in your grocery store, low fat, fat-free, reduced fat, that makes our fat intake really low, much lower than our body really needs. And that can actually lead to sugar cravings. So a lot of times when you are craving sugar or carbs, something starchy, whatever it is, for me, it's ice cream, right? But for some of you, it might be chips or pizza, you never know. But so a lot of times when you're craving that, it could mean that your diet is too low in fat. So you want to try and reevaluate. Think, was I limiting my fat? Are all my dairy products reduced fat, fat-free? Is my milk 1% instead of whole milk? So 1% is lower in fat. So maybe whole milk would be a better option. Next, weight loss requires you to eat fat. So if you're not eating enough fat, how are you going to be full? What are you going to fill up on? Vegetables? Probably not. Probably carbs. Probably starchy foods. I mean, if you're cutting down your butter and you're buying everything low fat, you're probably going to put a little bit more rice on your plate because you're still going to be hungry. You're going to have more potatoes. You're going to have more bread because you're going to be hungry. So that means that you won't be burning fat, though. And you're trying to do that because you're trying to lose weight, right? So if we're talking about weight loss, remember earlier I said if you're eating carbs, it literally tells your cells in your body to close the door, don't burn any fat right now. So you're fighting an uphill battle, basically, by doing a low-fat diet and trying to lose weight. So the answer, obviously, is, if you haven't figured that out, if you're trying to lose weight, it's best to just focus on your carbs. Find the foods on your plate at every meal that are carbs. Take the usual amount it would be and just cut it in half. So if you're usually eating a whole potato, eat half the potato. Save the other one for the next day. And then you think, okay, well, I'm going to be hungry. How am I going to do that? I'll last like an hour, and then I'll be back in the fridge looking for a snack, right? No. Add extra butter to that potato. Add extra butter to the vegetables on your plate. Increase the vegetables, add butter, cut down on the potato, add more butter. The butter will help make you feel satisfied and fill you up and keep the food in there a little bit longer. That's what it does. So think about your breakfast. If you're trying to lose weight, you're thinking, okay, I need more fat, I need less carbs. I usually eat cereal and milk. What two food groups are cereal and milk? Carbs, that's it. Carbs and carbs. Cereal is carbs, milk is carbs. So what about eggs and bacon? I mean, who doesn't like eggs and bacon? Or eggs and sausage, whatever you prefer. So eggs and the sausage, whatever meat, is going to be protein and fat. You can add a piece of toast if you want, so that you have some of that quicker energy. Especially if you're not used to having lower carbs. It can be hard to get used to at first, but it has longer lasting effects. So, look at your lunch. If you have a sandwich for lunch, usually, you have 2 pieces of bread, that's 2 carbs. Where's the fat? Let's see, if you have a chicken sandwich or turkey and cheese sandwich. That's mainly protein, a little bit of fat. So you could just do half the sandwich, so 1 carb because 1 piece of bread. And then you could add something with fat in it, like avocado. You could have a side of like celery and peanut butter. You could have cheese stick. You name it. Just think of the options that don't fall into that carbohydrate category. So review, if you need to, the carbohydrate slide and those list of carbohydrates. You want to cut down on that and increase the fat. All right, so next I have heart health requires saturated fat. So remember, saturated fat was that solid, strong fat, butter, eggs, meat. And again, like I mentioned before, so this is a little surprising. Heart health requires more fat and fat from butter and eggs. So let me just tell you a little bit about this because I know it's going to raise a lot of questions, and I want to get those answered for you. So the way that this works, like I said, the key is inflammation. Inflammation is the root cause of heart disease and other major chronic diseases, right? Now, most people think that cholesterol is the cause. So let me back up a little. Let's talk about inflammation and then cholesterol. So when we have inflammation in our arteries, this is what happens. We have our artery like this, and then when it's inflamed, it gets irritated and so swells, and then it gets smaller, right? So your arteries start getting smaller, and it gets more difficult for the blood and everything to go through. Okay, so what happens then is that cholesterol comes along, and it sees because your arteries are swollen and irritated, the walls of the arteries become very fragile. So think of it like you cut yourself, and it starts getting swollen and red, and it's more fragile. I mean, if you hit it again on like a door by accident, and you had just like cut it earlier, it's gonna hurt more than if you had hit a part of yourself that didn't have a big cut on it, right? So it's more fragile, it's weak, it's vulnerable. So the cholesterol's job is to act as a band-aid and make sure that wall doesn't burst open, because that would be a big problem, right? So the cholesterol just goes and patches up along the sides of the artery, the parts that are most vulnerable and most weak. And that's its job. It's meant to do that. If it didn't do that, again, big problem. You would have a ruptured artery, and that would be serious. So if you're trying to solve heart disease, you can't reduce cholesterol because the inflammation will still be there. So if you just have inflamed veins without the cholesterol, that's a problem too. So what do? Take care of the inflammation so that the cholesterol doesn't have to go there in the first place. So if you take care of the inflammation, the cholesterol gets reduced naturally as a natural side effect. It's not needed. So if your cholesterol is raised, you check your labs recently and your cholesterol is high, that is a sign that there's a lot of inflammation. So you don't want to start reducing your fat intake or your cholesterol intake. You want to do quite the opposite. Increase your saturated fat, your butter, eggs, meat. Decrease the things that cause inflammation, carbohydrates, and unsaturated processed refined oils, okay? Hope that makes sense. But for those of you who have taken the class before, I'm sure that you would be able to answer some questions and clarify. Otherwise, you can write down your questions and send them in, and I'll answer them. And then just to clarify here, I have this last bullet point that saturated fat does not increase cholesterol. And this is actually a point that the new nutrition guidelines nationwide recognize, that if you eat fat or cholesterol, it doesn't make your cholesterol in your body go up. So again, just refer to the slides earlier. The only thing that makes your cholesterol go up is inflammation. The only thing that makes your inflammation go up, carbs and unsaturated fats. All right, guys, so that's the end of the first class. We talked about the 3 food groups, and then we got into inflammation and heart disease or other chronic diseases. We talked a little bit about weight loss, increasing fat, decreasing carbs. So basically your homework is to draw a picture right now of your plate, your dinner plate. Pretend it's your dinner plate. Put on it, draw on it what you would typically have. Pick a regular meal. And you have to make the portions life size, realistic. Don't lie to us. Okay, now, and pretend you haven't heard this class, right? So just do it like you normally would. And then now take a second look at it and apply what you learned. What would you change? How could you change it? What improvements could be made? And then that will be your goal for this week. Just focus on one meal at a time. So if it's dinner, just focus on dinners for the next few weeks, on improving your dinner and implementing those changes. You can pick whatever meal you want, but just focus on that change. Reduce those carbs, increase your fat. Make sure you're not too hungry, okay? Because if you're too hungry after making those changes, you'll get cravings and it'll be very difficult to stick to. All right, well, good luck, guys, and I'll be back again for the second class.